She's become a global guru for leadership, culture, and operations, and helped transform major organizations, both in business and non-for-profits. So it's an honor for me to welcome our guest today. But Rick, you've known her for a long time, way before she started doing all this. So why don't you introduce our guest to us?
With pleasure. Thanks, Lucia. So most of us are old enough to remember September 11th, where we were, 2001. And I can tell you, I recall where I was on September 12th, 2001. And I was in the classroom at Harvard Business School in a class led by a then junior professor who, within minutes, first morning session on that sort of fateful morning after, if you will, commanded our attention and won our trust better than most leaders do in months or even years. And so for me, I'm delighted to welcome the professor I had in business school who had a greater influence on me than any other, Professor Frances Frei.
Well, Professor Frances Frei is thrilled to be here with you, Rick, and with my new friend, Lucia. I'm really grateful for the opportunity and the chance to spend time with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's quite an intro. I'm wondering whether it was a dream or any professor's worst nightmare. What was going on back then?
I don't. That's a good question. I have always had a thing about teaching. So I never liked going to school. I'm not sure I've confessed this very often. I hated class, hated it. It was always a struggle for me to attend. And so when I taught, my biggest motivation was to give people a compelling reason to go to class, because I learned from just studying the textbooks. I was a math major, so I didn't really go to class, but I studied the textbooks and I did fine. So I wanted to give people a compelling reason to go to class. That's like always been my thing. So I'm thinking about, we've all just experienced this personal tragedy. We're all coming together, and it is my obligation to make sure that we have a compelling reason to convene. And then I just spoke from the heart to the people in front of me who I had very great ambition for, and it has proved to be correct with Mr. Zednik here.
Well, and I should maybe expand slightly on when I said that you established the trust relationship within minutes. I'll never forget it. It was something which I remember I was in the classroom and I said, I need to write this down. Like, what I'm hearing is moving me. And you said, this is not an ordinary day. Let's not pretend that it is. We've lost many people. And you said, do what you need to do. If you need to leave, leave. If you want to participate silently, do that. If you want to participate actively, that's fine. And you trusted us to do what we believed was best for us, giving us the option to leave. And guess what? Nobody left that classroom. So it was that trust that we just immediately, we said, okay, it boosted our self-confidence because you trusted us.
I remember who opened the case. I remembered what the case was. And I remember that we reflected on who had sat in the seats before us. Not all of them were still with us as a result of this. I still can tear up thinking about it.
Yeah, it just reminds us of how little we remember those moments, right? As time passes by, it feels like it becomes part of the history, but it doesn't. Yeah. For so many of you, and as it remains part of the everyday. And so I wonder, as a professor, what were you hoping to achieve that morning versus what did you achieve that makes your students like Rick still recall the situation 20 years later?
I wanted us all to breathe the same air and to come together. Here's what I know about students in any capacity. We are so much better collectively than we are individually. I consider myself one of the students, even though I'm the one facilitating in the front of the room. And we just are so much better collectively. And so my intention was to just try to bring us all together early on, because this was a very hard moment, the hardest moment I've ever had professionally. And I wanted us to, I didn't know specifically how we were going to do it, but I wanted us to do it together. I just thought we would do so much more. Lexi Reese opened up the case. I remember it to this day. Lexi Reese, who just ran for Senate
Yes.
in California. So we were collectively amazing, and
Would you like to
individually.
just explain to our European audiences what does it mean opened up the case?
So to start every case at the Harvard Business School, you call on a person. They don't know they're going to get called on, so it's called a cold call. You call on them and you ask them, you say, will you please open the case? And then in front of all of their peers, they set the stage for the case, and then they give their point of view. And I think that people remember it. Rick, you can keep me honest, but decades later, you remember the cases that you were cold called to open. Is that right?
I tend to forget negative experiences.
Selective memory.
I don't believe you for a minute, Rick. I bet you remember every single time you were asked to open a case.
But yeah, no, I remember that morning what the case was. It was Progressive Insurance.
It was Progressive Insurance.
So 23 years later, I can tell you exactly what case we were talking about on that morning.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let me, and Lucia, by the way, and for listeners, part of what, I mean, obviously it was a sort of global shock to the system, but where we were sitting was 20-minute drive from Logan Airport, where 2 of the planes had taken off from. And so the hijackers had stayed the night in a motel, like walking distance from where we were sitting. So this was really hitting close to home. Frances, though, I want to sort of take that and ask you about the question of trust, which you have done so much with since that time, in your writing and your teaching. And it seems so, like, you make it sound almost so obvious when you talk about it, that trust is so important, and yet it needs to be said because so many leaders seem to fail to recognize that. Why is that?
Well, I would say that the goal of explaining a concept, the goal of learning a concept, so I often think about our job is to understand things so deeply that we can describe them simply. And how do you know when it's simple enough? When it's obvious. So I would say that I've done enough drafts that it appears obvious. In fact, anything I talk about, if it doesn't appear obvious, I haven't done enough work on it. So that's my take on what our job is as communicators. And I think early on I used to think that, a draft or 2 is enough. And now I write like 10, 11, 12 drafts. I know I'm done when it's obvious. So I think that's the first part. The second part is I had heard so many myths about trust that in my experience weren't true. And so that was my scent to go after it. So I believe that trust is foundational, but people said it takes, a lifetime to build. You described a case where trust was built in minutes. I had experienced those, so I knew that trust could be built quickly. So it was a myth that it must take. I believe it did take a lifetime to build for some people, but there also must have been a secret memo there must have been something that other people were doing, because I watched it get built really quickly. I also heard the myth that you can never rebuild trust to its former level. Again, I had seen trust not only rebuilt to its former level, but even greater than its former level if you did it right. So I think it was the combination of, I knew how important it was, and these myths were like, everyone repeated it. You go say trust to anyone today, and if they haven't been exposed to my work or someone like me, they will tell you it takes a lifetime to build, a moment to lose, and you can never rebuild it again. All of those statements are true. All those statements are false. So I haven't had enough distribution on my ideas, because you go and ask 10 people, and at least 9 of them are going to say the phrases I just said to you. The most widely distributed false secret memo I know of.
Interesting.
Nice. And so obviously trust is a killer or the biggest currency of some of the organizations with healthy cultures. And you've helped transform cultures of very large organizations, ranging from Harvard Business School through Uber, through others that I may not even know about. And so I wonder, we also wanted to ask you about like the gender equality and empowerment aspects of the cultural transformation of organizations. But before we go there, would you like to share what are the secret ingredients for the organizations to manage to go through the transformation that you see possible? Like,
Sure.
what is the determinant whether HBS or Uber or others get it or don't get it right?
Yeah. So I'll say that there are three things that I experienced. And then when I look out at the world, successful transformations have these three things in common, and unsuccessful ones fall down on one of these three. So it's one, we have to honor the past. So a mistake people make when they want to do a transformation is they say, oh, the past was bad, I'm here and I'm here to be the hero, and then the future will be great. Doesn't work. We have to honor the good and the bad about the past. We got to make it really clear to the people that were there before us, all the things that aren't going to change, right? Because if we just come in and say the past was bad, people think we don't really see them. We haven't taken the time to understand. So honor the past is the first part. If you don't do that, I'm going to give you the second and third. It won't matter, right? So each one of these is a gating function. The second one is we have to provide a clear and compelling mandate for why do we have to change right now? Let's say I believe you, and I too think we should change. Do we really have to do it today? Like, what about next week? Next month, next quarter? How about next year? In the next 3 to 5 years? Like, why now? We have to give a really clear and really compelling change mandate. So, if you want to know how clear and how compelling, the equivalent of if you're a retailer and Walmart opens up next door, that clear and that compelling that we have to change, that whatever we were doing before has to change. So I think that's the second reason, because you might honor the past and people will believe you, but oh my goodness, do people like to postpone change? So that's the second part. And then the third part is we need to describe a way forward that is both rigorous and optimistic. So whatever our plans are, we have to keep drafting them and editing them until it has rigor. Because if we're just like, the future is going to be great with no rigor, people aren't going to follow us. They're just not going to feel safe. But similarly, if we're really rigorous but pessimistic, best days are behind us. The future is going to be bleak. Similarly, people aren't going to think that we're the leader that can help take them through it. So honor the past, clear and compelling change mandate, rigorous and optimistic way forward, past, present, future. When all of those are in place, the change tends to be quite effective.
So that's interesting, and especially, um, when you talk about things like companies which operate in markets and their, trends will come up and down, which I guess is true to some degree in the public or non-for-profit sectors as well. But I mean, the public sector is always there. How much? And I don't actually even know the answer to how much work you've done in the public sector. But some of the people who listen to what we're doing here are in the public sector. How much is this applicable, would you say, to public sector?
So in my experience, and I have more experience with for-profit organizations, but I work a lot with healthcare and then with some government departments. And Anne and I have helped with a few countries on developing their strategies and things like that. So I would say an intelligent consumer of, not an expert in, and I haven't found a single part of it that doesn't apply. I mean, the nuance will be more difficult perhaps, but all three parts apply. Like you want climate change to work. I can point to exactly why climate change hasn't worked, right? Like they get almost every single part of it. I want it to work very much, but for one example, they're describing a rigorous and pessimistic way forward. I can guarantee you, I have never seen change that works. So you gotta honoring the past. We're not honoring all of and my goodness, have we not given a clear and compelling change mandate? The people that believe us, but the people who don't. So I think it holds for all of it. Now, I'm not saying it's easy for all of it, and I'm not saying it's probably much easier to change an organization than a country, but I haven't found that it's a different recipe.
Okay.
I'd like you to share a little bit whether you feel there's a difference along the gender lines of how leadership works or leadership styles of differently gendered identifying people. And also, especially when you talk about honoring the past, I wonder whether it is or not a feminine quality of bringing this as an exercise into the community. I've never heard anybody talk about it this way. It reminds me of therapeutic conversations, how for us to be able to move forward, you have to like be okay and heal what needs to be healed, which is probably extremely hard to do with organizations that have been around for long, and people who have caused trauma and pain may no longer be there. So it's difficult to have those conversations, right? So how
Well, I
do
think if we
those come
don't
together?
have those conversations, they'll just, what's the scene from the Godfather movie? The past will just keep pulling us back. So I think
Yes.
the conversations, the sentiments are there. It's just whether or not we're going to discuss them. And Chris
Mm-hmm.
Argyris, who was maybe the greatest organizational theorist of all time, he had a phrase that he used, which is organizations need to discuss the undiscussable. And I think, Lucia, what you're suggesting, maybe it is difficult, but here's what I can tell you. If you don't discuss the undiscussable, it becomes more of a problem. So in the absence of talking, it goes from a pebble to a boulder to, et cetera. So I think that we, even if it's a little bit uncomfortable, we have to talk about it. And by the way, when I say honor the past, I mean honor the good and the bad. So I think it's really important for us to have a realistic view for doing it. Now, in terms of gender, I'm probably you. Very few people would want me to speak on behalf of gender of like for women. I'm if you have a continuum of whatever your continuum is out there, I am not like firmly implanted on the feminine style of leadership side of that continuum. So I'll tell you not from my experience, but from my observation for it, which is we need, if collaboration versus confrontation are choices, I can tell you which one wins. It's collaboration. If um, uh, if aggressive versus let's find a win-win sort of way of doing it, it's the win. So any of the things that are I'm not saying I possess them, but that are stereotypically, I don't mean that in a bad way, attributed to women, in general, organizations have been shielded from the dose that's needed.
Mm-hmm.
I think you need all the doses, but some organizations have like all the dose of the one kind, and we could just use mixing it up a little bit with the dose of the other kind. So in my experience, it's a breath of fresh air to bring it in. Now, the gender of people that bring it in, that can vary. But the
Yeah.
sentiment of what we're talking about, I think we need all of it. I think we need lots of doses of these things.
Can I follow up on that? Because I saw a conversation you had where you talked about inclusion and diversity in that order, right? And
Yes.
I thought that was really, really interesting because the sort of standard is people talk about D, E, and I, or D and I, but you flip it. And can you tell us about why?
I do. Yeah, I can tell you why. So I've seen many organizations that attracted loads of diversity, but they never ended up being inclusive of all of that majestic difference. So so when you're diverse, you may or may not become inclusive. But I have never seen an organization that was able to be inclusive that didn't also become magnificently diverse. So if you ask me which begets which, I focus on inclusion because I know I'm going to get both. And I see so many organizations and they very sadly get on this diversity treadmill where they bring in lots of difference. They don't set the conditions for difference. We really like people who are really like us, and we follow the golden rule and we treat others as we would like to be treated. And then we wonder why everyone is just like us, right? A caricature of where I am is, wow, everybody went to Harvard undergrad and then Harvard PhD and then Harvard faculty. What was explained to me when I joined the faculty, it was lovingly known as preparation H. Like that was the thing. Well, if you want to attract difference, learn how to be inclusive of difference first. Don't just bring in people that are different, because I can promise you they're just going to have a lower success rate. But if you're inclusive of it, well, then, oh my goodness, you're going to get the best difference in the world. So yes, I very much believe that inclusion is the focus, so that we can take advantage of the majestic difference that is required.
I'd like to ask about specifically the experience you have with working with states and public sector. And like, it's sort of like stuck in my mind when you said you help states. I wonder like how this is done, because the states, as a policymaker that I've experienced, the path dependency is just so huge. It takes so much more work to turn the direction of those Titanics in most cases. And so, how does this apply to
Yeah. So
smaller, mid-sized, or state organizations?
yeah. So what I should give a caveat that I can only help people that want to be helped. There are other people that can like push. I can't. For whatever all of this is, it is pull only. So when a state or someone comes calling and they say we have this, we want to do it, but we're getting it wrong, that's where I can be helpful. So it's in those instances. I have never been successful at push. And usually I do it by pointing out the well-intentioned ways that they're getting it wrong. And what happens is a small shift can make a big difference. And then that builds momentum. They might be getting things wrong on the messaging. They might be getting things wrong in the analysis. This happens a lot, that they're addressing the symptom of the problem as opposed to the root cause of the problem. And it will take an infinite amount of time to address the symptom. And so usually they'll say, we're doing this and it's not working. And then I just help them go from the symptom to the cause, and then it works. So I think it's the same principles. But what's harder, to your point, Lucia, is to get a state or any government that has multiple parties to agree they want help. That's the part. Once the help is asked for, then we can come in and be helpful. But when help is not wanted, no amount of help is helpful.
Do you know, Frances, we don't have much more time, but one thing I want to make sure we do is talk a little bit about your most recent book, right? Which was Move Fast and Fix Things. Have I got it right?
Yes.
And
Go ahead.
the false trade-off that people usually assume between excellence and speed, right? So just
right.
Tell us a little bit about why did you choose that, and what did you find?
Yeah. So I move fast and break things. In the end, its biggest damage, and it had damage, but its biggest damage to my mind is that it gave speed a bad name. The biggest damage from Move Fast and Break Things is that it convinced us, again, this is a false secret memo that was passing around. It convinced us that you could either go fast or you could take care, one or the other. And in my experience, the best way to take care is to go fast. Now, not recklessly, but imagine any of the problems that you care about. Is the best solution really to go slowly? No. When urgent problems require urgent attention, not reckless attention, urgent attention. And so often I would see people not addressing something, or, and the best thing, if you watch an organization put together a task force, I promise you, most of why they're doing it is because they want to delay. It's not because they think they're going to. And then when you put together a task force, oh my gosh, they do their work. You can measure it in months, quarters, and years for the analysis. So Move Fast and Fix Things, we organize it in a week. On Monday, you identify the problem. Those task forces, they're doing Monday's work in a year or in 9 months. I promise you, the fidelity of their solutions, the chance of them implementing real change, I have learned you can round it off to almost zero. So I think I want us to increase the metabolic rate of organizations. And so what Anne and I did is we showed, now it's a little cheeky, how to do it in a week. Mm-hmm. And you don't get to go fast until Friday. You got a lot of work to do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But I think that, I've observed successful change is much closer to a week than it is to a year. And it's much closer to those large task forces. Like I remember there was one time when Harvard did a task force years back, and I just watched them do something. I was like, oh my gosh, you've just added 2 years to how long? And it took 2 years longer to do it. And it's because they it's in like, oh, we want to be inclusive, we want to include everyone. I can use SurveyMonkey. I can literally include everyone overnight. I can be very rigorous. And then I can analyze that, and that'll take me a whole other day. But they just use all of this, and what I know is that I feel like I am on a mission to remove exhausted mediocrity from the people who really are trying to do work that on behalf of others. And so much of our conventional wisdom is to try really hard, and we end up doing it in the wrong way, and we get exhausted, and we have the upper bound of mediocre. And so we're trying to just publish the how-to manual on how to do it differently. But organization change that's going to be successful is faster is closer to a week than any other period of time, even for the hard problems.
Amazing. Lucia probably
I'd be curious.
Go ahead, Lucia.
Sorry. Yeah, tell me.
I was just going to say, I'm sure you've got one more question. I was going to sneak in one just on the back of what you were just saying, Frances, which is
go ahead.
Which is deadlines, right? In terms of and so Lucia and I are especially active with politicians, and an election is a deadline, right? It's a deadline, first of all, for your campaign, but it's also, we're seeing right now with both in the US and in Europe with big elections this year, right? Legislation has to get done before you don't know who's going to be legislating after election day, right? And so there's a deadline in the public sector, in the political and policy worlds, where those deadlines are they're vital. They matter, because if you don't hit them, the time has passed. Just, can you speak to, when you talk about,
Yeah. And I'm smiling. I don't know if this is going to be audio only or video, but if it's only audio, I'm smiling as Rick is saying that, because these deadlines are giving us license to slow down. Like, I can't express to you, if we went at the metabolic rate that the issue deserved, we would be done so much sooner. Deadlines are licensed to fill the allotted time. So the reason I don't love deadlines, or make the deadlines like, like Monday, Tuesday, but not this 6 months out deadline. I promise you it's going to fill the allotted time. And here's how I know it. After the 6 months, look back and look at what you accomplished, and then tell me how long would it have taken to accomplish that. And out of 6 months, you're going to tell me 1 week. Maybe not even a week. So the problem I have with deadlines is they're leisurely, and they just let us fill the allotted time, and we start putting our schedule in place for that. No, let's have the weekly meeting. Nobody wants to change. Everybody's just trying to fit it in. They're not actually treating it with the urgency it deserves.
Interesting, thanks.
So since I only had the right to one last question, I'm going to squeeze in two monster questions into one.
Okay.
And I know you can handle that. So the first is, what does this mean for democracy so that it's fast enough and functional and participatory enough? I hear people who helped build European Union several decades ago, they would say, we only achieved these big projects because we didn't have internet and democracy and interest groups for whoever, wherever, and we could just go fast. Now, Brussels is still criticized for not being transparent. So what do we do with democracy as it is so that it can continue advancing, dealing with these challenges that we're dealing with? And what does
That's your first of 2-point question.
That's my first.
How do I save democracy? All right, go ahead. No, great.
And my second one is, how do you save education system, which is obviously not preparing citizens to be part of the system? So how do we educate citizens who are empowered and motivated to be part of this new democracy model that you will describe now?
All right. Hilarious. I like your ambition. So here it is for democracy. That inclusion that I talked about, that you want to be inclusive. Well, here's the thing. I have to be, let's say that you and Rick were on opposite ends of where you thought our democracy should be headed. Like a two-party system, you're each in two different parties. I cannot be inclusive of Rick in a way that's going to be exclusive to you, Lucia, and vice versa. So the mistake we make is that we benefit others. We're more inclusive of others, and we're doing it in a way that's just going to guarantee somebody else is going to have to come back later and do inclusion of you. Like, what we're doing is pretending it's a fixed pie. So anytime I've ever gone into an organization that was having some gender issues, for example, when we made the world better for women, we made it better for men as well. Like, you can't make the world better for women at the expense of making it worse for men. This is the mistake that so many democracies are making is that we have this fixed pie mindset, which means we don't come up with the creative solutions to do both. So I think that, so how do we do it? Honor the past in the good and the bad, and you're not allowed to have solutions that don't make it better for everyone. Now, good news, it's not working out that well for many. I actually think as soon as you realize you can't disadvantage any, you're going to start coming up with amazing solutions. We're so far off of the frontier. So that's what my answer is there. It's that when you make the world better for some, you must make it better for all. And political parties think it's their job to do the opposite, is at least in my observation of it. And that won't ever work. So that's, I think, the first part. The education part is the second question, which will, I don't think democracy is harder now because of the internet. I mean, we have more involved, like everyone is involved now. You can't tell me that democracy is worse with more engagement. So I'm not going to believe the old time Brussels part of it. But here's the thing about education. We want to help people have free thought. Like we want to help people to craft their own point of view, their own judgment, to be independent thinkers. To do that, we want to give them a rigorous foundation. So we give you a rigorous foundation, and then we have to be delighted at wherever you take it. Well, I am more optimistic in 2024 than I ever have been in my whole life that we can provide every single person on the planet a rigorous foundation. This is like, honestly, if I was starting an AI company, it would be to do this. We can give everyone a companion to sit right on their shoulder. Listen to Sal Khan talk about the Khan Academy. We can have every single person can have a tutor. Its first name is A, and its second name is I. So and that's, I think, the goal of education is to provide the foundation equally, not to unequally. And AI is going to be the great equalizer in doing it. And then put people in positions to stretch their judgment, put them in a position to try when the stakes are low, to what would you do in this circumstance, and practice it and talk about it and learn from it. Like that, to me, is what education should be. And I think we are equipped to do it for everyone on the planet. So I couldn't be more optimistic. I don't want everyone to think the same thing. That's not, to me, education. I want everyone to have a rigorous way of thinking. And then I want them to get to practice judgment and practice decision making, and I know I look back to I did not make good judgments early on in my career. Well, imagine if I got to practice that at school. I would have already been up the learning curve by the time I graduated from school. That, to me, is the great promise.
Beautiful.
I think, Lucia, if I'm right, we are pretty much out of our time. So we want to thank you, Frances. I know that you're not keen on travel, but one of these days, I hope to see you in Europe.
I mean, sure, me too. Actually, there is a chance I will go to Europe in 2 years. So let's do it this. When I am in Europe, I will piggyback a visit with you.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Give us a little advance notice. It's a small place. We can get from one end to the other pretty easily. So.
And I don't want you people in Europe to take this personally. I don't go anywhere anymore.
Yeah.
I'm in Cambridge. I ask people to come to the Harvard Business School to visit with me. Is that so hard? Is that too much?
Thank you. It's been a privilege to peek into your world. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been a delight. I can scarcely believe it's already over.
Thank you so much, Frances. Thanks for taking the time. And looking forward to the next time, whenever that may be.
On campus, Rick.
I'm going to join.
Yay.